So last time we started looking at React, I'll continue with that today. And we got this application running where we have a button, two buttons. We click the buttons and it changes the value that's displayed. That's what we looked at that last time. Just a very quick summary on that one. We defined a number class. It extends the React component class, and that's what we use. That's what we use down here to implement that. So everything, you see that right there, that this element right there, that thing right there pretty much encapsulates all of this together. The one up here and the buttons themselves. So this whole thing right here would be a single component, and that component is this number element, an instance of this number class, or number tag, I guess you call it. And that's what we looked at last time. And we have these, event listeners. So when the user clicks the number 2 button, we want to change the state of this number component so that it knows that it should be rendering the value 2 at this point. So we set the state, and the state is just an object, with name value pairs in it, right? With attributes and their values. And so we're using the identifier n, the letter n, to represent the number that this number component should display. So we call set state, and when you call set state, by the way, this function set state, it doesn't actually replace the state with this. It takes this and it merges it into the existing state. So let's suppose the existing state had attributes for x, y, and z. And then after calling set state here, it'll have attributes for x, y, z, and n. So it adds, it merges onto the state, any values that we pass in using set state like this. And in order for this to work correctly, we had to call bind on the two functions. Because when these functions are invoked, they're inside of a thread of execution where the browser's just waiting. Okay, the browser's waiting, and the user does something. The user clicks on the button, and then that triggers an event. And so this event is, and then the browser's going to basically invoke these event handlers one after another, according to whatever rule it follows, the rule that it follows. And eventually this handle 1 is going to get executed. But when this, if you look at how we set this thing, down here, see that? This handle 1 function and handle 2 function as well. We're just passing in a reference to the function. We don't pass in a reference to an object that the function should be run against. Like when you get an object, say an object O, and you want to call a function f on it, you're going to go O.f, right? That's how you call f on O. F is a member function of O. In JavaScript, you got these handle 1 and handle 2 are member functions of the number class, okay? But in JavaScript, they're also considered just functions, independent of the number class. They're just floating around as, what they are. They're just functions. And here, they're just seen as functions. So this is a reference to the function. So when the event happens and the browser goes to pass control to this function, it's not invoking the function against any instance of the number class. It's just calling the function directly. And that's why when the when the function runs, this will refer to, in that context, this will refer to the global namespace. So when you call a function by itself, without the dot operator, in other words, you're not invoking the function against an object. You're just calling the function by itself. When you do that, the word this inside the function refers to the global object, which is called window, the window object in browsers. And so the window object doesn't have a set state function, so it's not going to work. And even if it did have a set state function, it's not what we want. We want to call set state on this particular number instance that we created. So what do is we take the function, here's the function, here's a reference to the function, here's a pointer, I've highlighted it exactly, I didn't highlight one character too many, just exactly. All right, this here that I have highlighted is a reference to the function. And when we want this function, when that function gets called down here in this, as a result of this click event, we want the function to be called against the instance of the number class. So what we do is all functions. Functions are objects just like everything in JavaScript. Well, not everything's an object, but almost everything is, right? And so function objects, functions are objects. Okay? Function objects have properties and functions themselves. So you can call a function on a function. And all functions have a bind function. So we're going to call this handle one function, we're invoking its bind function. Bind, that's like glue, right? You want to bind something. I'm going to bind this to this. Now, what does this refer to right now? Look at that. What does that refer to? We're in the constructor for the number class. So this refers to the instance of the number class that we are currently constructing. So when you see this identifier, this, and all these places, these are all references to the instance of the number class that we are constructing. And that's what we want that to refer to. When handle one runs, we want this to refer to the instance of the number class that we created down here. And for that to happen, we take this is the reference. This here is the reference. It's the variable in this number instance that points to a function. It points to this function here that runs on onClick. But we don't want it to point to that function directly. We want to go through a wrapper object. And we want to go through a wrapper function, actually, better way to say it. All the functions are objects. So what we do is we want to wrap this thing inside of a function that when it's called, turns around and calls handle one in such a way that this refers to that number instance. So that's what bind does. Bind returns a wrapper around the function that it's called against. That's the function we're calling bind against. So bind returns a wrapper, an object that wraps, that contains this handle one function. And then we turn around and say, oh, rather than referring to the original handle one function, which doesn't work for us in the event on click here, we're going to have this handle one attribute refer to the wrapper object that wraps the function. So when we invoke the wrapper function does the right thing. All the wrapper function does is it turns around, and it makes sure that this refers to, this number instance, and then invokes handle one. So it looks as if we're calling, the object dot handle one. So these things work correctly. Now, it's possible to work to, as Eric mentioned last time, that there's an alternative approach to doing this. And rather than defining handle one like this, what we can do is, what's this, handle one equals, this is how we did it, equals, I use this arrow function here. There we go. So now, if we define the function in this manner, using this fancy syntax, relatively new syntax, then we don't have to call bind. And we can test that. Let's go ahead and test that. Reload. Site cannot be reached. What's going on? What is no such file? Oh, starting it wrong. No, not this. All right, so notice, so we're not calling bind anymore. Let's see if handle one still works. And see if we do view source on this. Actually, I'll have to click on it. Like, see, it is commented out. Okay, just to prove it to you. So 2 works. That's the way it was implemented last time. That's correct. And 1 also works without an error. Now, if we take this out, right, but leave handle 2 defined in the old-fashioned way, then we're going to have an error. 1 works correctly, but 2 will fail. Now watch for the error message here. There it is. Cannot read property set state of null. That's what it says, because it's pretty small, you might not be able to read it. Cannot read property set state of null, line 16 on app.jsx. Line 16, I'm going to go to line 16. There it is. It's saying set state, it cannot read set state of null. Oh, what is it saying there? What is it talking about? Null. Cannot read property set state of null. In other words, this is null. I said this was the global namespace, didn't I? Well, that must be because we're inside of JSX. So probably JSX does something different on this. It lets, this doesn't end up being the global namespace, it ends up being null. Cannot call set state of null. Cannot read property set state of null. So there's the problem. This is undefined there. So now this syntax here, I think what's happening, so I'll restore that. Now that works again, 2 and 1. Now I think what's happening here is that this function doesn't actually, well, I don't know. I can only guess at what's going on, but I'm going to leave it at that. Also, there's another thing I wanted to mention about this. I was reading through the documentation yesterday, and there was a statement saying that this syntax is still a proposed syntax, although it's implemented in the browser that we're using right now. Some browsers don't implement it. I don't think Internet Explorer implements it. And some other contexts may not implement this correctly. So, according to the new specification. So this is not 100% reliable. So for that reason, I'm going to go with the old syntax. Okay, so that's the discussion about that. Now what I thought I'd do is this is a record of my experiments. And I changed something last night. What was it? I put I had that line inside the head, but actually this line should follow this root div here, because this script uses this, refers to this element. So we need to make sure that exists first before the script runs. So I put the script down here, although it was apparently running okay last time without that, I think. All right, so here you'll see these are the libraries that implement JSX and React. I'm just going to get a copy of those lines right there. And so we did that. We made a number component, and we did that. And then what I wanted to do was show how a React component can use ajax to initialize itself. And what we'll do is we'll have a component that shows the exchange rate for Bitcoin in US dollars. All right, so that's a real-time exchange rate. And so let's see, what am I going to do here? All right. What we could do is we could add it to that mmap. That's what I was thinking about, to show you how to merge it in, we can practice adding React to an existing app that doesn't have it yet. So let's go ahead and do that. Someone has a different idea. All right. So I'm going to start that up. So let's take a look at this app just to remind ourselves what it is that we did when we built that thing. Okay, it was this login app, right? Welcome to Express. We log in. I'll see this AA. It's really kind of inconvenient to type that in every time. So what I want to do is have this form. I want A's in here automatically, so I don't have to type them in, because I have to log in a lot during testing. So inside the views, there's a login file. And in here, we have these two input fields, and we're going to give it a default value. So the default value is going to be A. That's the user ID. And the password, the default value, will also be A. And I'm just going to neaten these up a little bit. These are the two input fields. Now, the pug files are reloaded because we're in debug mode, so the pug files are scanned every time we want to use a pug file. The system checks the file system to see if a new version of the file is available, and it'll load that on the fly as needed. So that's not, it only does that with pug right now. It's not doing it with the other parts of the system. We'd have to use what Eric talked about. I forgot what it was. What was it he was using? Something that where you're running nodes so that that whenever you do like a require, you always pull from the file system. Anyway, I'm going to skip that. Let's see this. I'm going to reload this login form, and I don't get anything. There's no default value here, is there? What is going on there? This is, maybe it's just value. Let me try that. That's what it is. I thought it was default value. I think there is a default value you want to look at. So now, we go to log in. It's already there. Log out. I thought that default value was working. Let me double check that. Oops. Yeah, there's no. Oh dear, I don't get it. What's going on with that? So there is some discussion about that in the documentation that I don't fully understand yet. Let's see. What's that? React default value. What am I doing now? Oh, this is pug, right? Pug input. Oh, I see. That's yeah. No. Default value. I was thinking React. This is just ordinary HTML. Okay. All right. So that's there. Yeah. So default value is an attribute that's used in React. I'm still trying to separate, React from non-React code now. Okay. All right. Let's. So when we log in, we come to this users page. Let's take a look at that users page. And it has a logout link, and some data is passed into it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this. Instead of passing in generic data, I'm going to say welcome to, do we need this sharp sign? And we'll pass in the user ID. We'll render the user ID there. I don't see what this pound sign, this sharp sign, we don't really need that, do we? I don't think we need that. I think this is good enough. And let's see. So that's probably undefined, it's null. Let's prove it to ourselves. I think we're going to see either true or 1 listed. So user ID equal. So in other words, it's exactly equal to null. Well, this means it can be, it's either exactly equal to null or is automatically converted to null, to something that's equal to null. I think it's exactly null. I'm going to go for broke on that one. There it is. Oh, it's false. So user ID is not null. But undefined. It's undefined. So user ID is undefined. So apparently when you, in Pug, when you pass in a variable that's undefined, it's it won't crash, and it will simply, why is it coming up true? All right, let's get it so that we can display this user ID. So we have to let's find the router that routes to the user page. This is where we render the users, and here it says data, I am data, but what we really want is the user ID here. Let's see. Oh, this file will not be reloaded. This is not a PUG file. So to get that to reload, I need to shut down the server and start it up again. I am user, but now we want the user ID we want the real user ID. So how are we going to do that? Do you remember where the user ID is? Now we're a logged in user. I remember when for a user to be logged in, what we do is we have the session object that we can always access through the request object. Every time a request comes in, the session object reference is attached to it so we can get to it easily. And then, so in the session object, we store the user ID as a record that the user logged in. So we want to know who they are too. When we hit the database, we need their user ID. If we store the password, it's not going to help us get data out of the database. So we need the user ID. We need a way to see, oh, that's the person that's in there. I can hit the database and get information. So that's it. So that's where this user ID comes from. It comes from that session object. Request dot session dot user ID. Kill the server, start it again. Reload, log in. There it is. I'm A, right? Log out, log in. I will log in as B this time. Welcome B. So that's how we pass information to PUG. We pass it what we call render. Remember, render on this is the response object. Remember, our request handlers, we get a request response object. And the response object has a render method that's only called when you want to render a template. PUG is the template system. This is the name of the template, users.pug. We leave out the extension. And how does the system know the extension, by the way? Because it's how does it find users.pug? Just by typing in users. Because take a look at this. This is, look at the way we, look at the way we defined, not defined, look at the way we did here, right there. Here, when we set the view engine to PUG, right there. That's where it knows it's PUG. So that's how that works. Now, when the user logs in, let's show the user the exchange rate of Bitcoin. So let's create a component that does that. All right, let's do it. So we'll start with, well, I'm going to start with the PUG file. And let's see, where would that be? That would be, oh, so we don't even have We don't even have React in this app yet, so it's not there. So we've got to figure out how to structure React in here. Let's do it like this. I'll start like this. I'll go down the bottom. So here we have a script. I just want to see if this is the right syntax. So we want to include a script. I think that's how you do it. Should say hi here. It does. We're good. So this is where we can basically run our scripts. So what we'll do is we'll add React to the whole application. So we'll pretty much make React available globally. And I'll take this out for now. And this layout file, let's load the scripts here. Now when we load these scripts, see, with these script elements, we have the src attribute, and these are good. These are good. So let me just get these. There we go. So with Pug, we have the tag name, parenthesis, and then you have the attributes. So this src attribute, and that's the end right there. So is that me? Change to. But I turn this thing off. There we go. All right. So we'll close that. Oops, that was not right. Close that right there. All right, so there we are loading. We're not quite there yet. There we go. I think this is good. Let's test it. It's just some syntax error will show up in here. It's good. All right, so we loaded the React libraries, including JSX. And there's something else I want to do here. Let's set the user ID. How do I want to do that? Think about how I want to do that. All right, I think I'll skip that stuff, and let me go directly into that users page there. So we're extending layout, so we get those libraries that get loaded, you know, they're loaded for us. And then it's in here that we need to do stuff. So we have a script. Now what we're going to do is add a script but we have to have the type set to Babel. So we do it like this. We need that period right there. Now we can enter JSX. And in fact, we could just grab this whole thing here, right? This, why not? Just grab this. This line here, this makes me nervous. I don't know if that blank is acceptable. Let's see. I'll put it back in there later. This could be inconvenient. So actually, why don't we just load this from an external? So this is called the, yeah, we could do it like that. We can load it. Let me think. All right, how are we going to do this? I'll leave it like this for now. I'm trying to keep it simple. All right. So here we have the app, and this is the app component. That's like the top level component. And this is going to be kind of boilerplate code here, this part. Well, maybe not this. That's the rate, isn't it? I think what I'm going to do is, hold on, let me do it like this. I'm going to change this around a bit. I'm going to call this, call it what, Bitcoin? It's the Bitcoin component. It has a state, and it's the rate. It's just US dollars, but the site, the service gives you the exchange rate for a number of different currencies. Let's see, so there's the rate, and then we'll start with the rate equaling 0. Then we have this render function, and it's just a statement that the Bitcoin in US dollars is equal to this.state.rate. Let me stretch this out a little bit. So that's the render function. I said the constructor should look like this. Sorry about that. And render function should be like this. Remember, return is a little tricky. I'm just going to go with the kind of the standard formulation here. Just use parenthesis there because of the semicolon insertion problem. Drop this down like that. There we go. So here's the constructor function that closes the function. There's a render function that closes the function. That nice syntax highlighting there so I can match up the braces. And then we have this component did mount. This means component did mount is an event that occurs when an instance of this class, Bitcoin, is an instance of Bitcoin when that gets inserted into the DOM. And it's been mounted. And once it's inserted into the DOM, we can populate it with data, it'll become visible. So that's where we're going to do that's where we're going to get the information. So we're going to send out a request. So we use this object here, the constructor, called the XML HTTP request. This is the function that gives you ajax. It's the function that lets JavaScript be its own browser. See, what does the browser do? The browser, you type in the URL in the browser, right? And the browser sends a request message to the server, and it gets a response message back. Okay, that's what the browser does. Okay, but what JavaScript do the same thing. It does it with this this class here, this constructor function. This object that you can create out of this lets you be like a browser. You send this lets your code, your JavaScript code, send a request message to the server, and then the server returns to your JavaScript code a reply. And this is a little of a misnomer. XML, originally, this thing was created when XML was hot, and everybody was thinking everything would be converted to XML. It was such a fantastic thing. Turned out to be kind of a cumbersome methodology that's people are getting away from. But nevertheless, the name has remained XML HTTP request, and it's more common these days to retrieve data in the form of JSON as opposed to XML. So it should be really JSON HTTP request. You should just leave these three letters out anyway. HTTP request would have been a better name. So I'm letting R be a reference to that HTTP request object, and then here we register an event listener to it. So there's a load method. So this means that the data has come back, and the system has loaded the data that's come back to it. And then we want this basically this event handler to run. And let's see, what does it do? We declare a variable called rate, exchange rate, and we go all through all kinds of business here. Let me do it. Let me break that down a bit so you can see. It's a little hard to read. Okay, so let's do it like this. So we're going to say let the so R is the response, and what we want is the response data as the response data. We want it as a JavaScript object. And but what we have it as is we have it as a JSON string because that's what the server. This is it. This is the server right here, by the way, CoinDesk.com. That this system returns values in JSON, so that when we get the response is going to be, here's the response message. It's in R, right? So I'm sorry, that's the request object. The load method has just fired, so we know that the data has arrived. So from this response, from this request object here, I'm going to rename things a bit here. I'm going to call that REQ for request, and that's a better name. And so from this request object that we created, that it has we pull the data out as by calling the property response text. So that just gives us a string. That gives us the data as a string. So we're going to pass that string to the JSON parse method that's built into the browser API. Well, it's part of the JavaScript language, I think. Is that part of the language? JSON.parse is probably a part of the language, I think. And then, so basically it converts that string, the string that we got from the server, into an object. And then from that object, we're going to pull out, in fact, let's do it like this. Rather than if you dump that object, let me show you what that looks like. Let's see. I don't have it in there. Let's see what that object looks like. Let's look at what this thing returns to us. Actually, we can look at what it returns to us. There's the URL right there. Let me show you what that does. Let's take a look at that. There it is. Well, it's hard to analyze. So how did I analyze it? Well, I'm just going to do right now what I did the other day when I was looking at this thing. I copied this. It's too hard to read, right? It's not structured well. And so I'm just going to put it down here to take a look at it. So this is what the object looks like. There's a time, what do you call it, a time attribute. And it looks like it's equal to an object. Look at how I'm doing this. Do you see I'm breaking it down? I have a hard time reading this unless I do this. Yeah. There's an extension you can download that just gives that to you? How do I get it? JSON. Okay. You can read and change all the data on the websites I visit. Holy cow. That's a lot of power, isn't it? Kind of don't want to do it, you know. I mean, it's sort of optional, you know. The fewer permissions I give to things like that, the better. I'm really paranoid these days. Thank you for that. Okay, here's some more information here, and this is the end of the object right there. And then we get the next one, and it just goes on and on, right? So just a disclaimer, whatever. Well, that was a long one. Chart name, Bitcoin, BPI, and this gives the what do you call it? The different currencies that that provides rates for. So that's the number we want right there. See here, this one. United States dollar float. Oh, see what we want is the float rate, not the. See this rate here? It's got a comma in there. So you can't really parse it as a number, right? So that you can use it as a string, but leave it as a string. If you want to parse it and use it as a number, you should use the rate float. This is the same value, just with the missing comma. And here we go. That's the USD, and then what's this? The British pound. Is that what that is? GBP. The pound. And then there's the euro, and that's it. They have other currencies too, by the way. They have other URLs. If you go to the site, you can read about it. They get a lot. So basically, this is the object that's getting returned to us. See, there's the URL right there, and it just gives us this data. So that's what our JavaScript is getting. It's getting this object. So when we drill into it, whatever the object is, right? This would be, let's suppose the object, we refer to the object as O. It would be O.time. It gives us that gives it this. O dot time gives us this object with 3 fields in it. And then O dot disclaimer, it gives us a string here. O dot chart name gives us this string. O dot BPI gives us this object, which has got 3 fields in it. One called USD, another one called GBP, and the other one called Euro. Which is right here. And that ends it right there. That's the end. So we want to drill in here. We have to go our object dot BPI dot USD dot rate float. That's how we're going to get that number. And that's what I had there. So the rate, oh, here it is. I'll do it like that. So the rate is going to be this result data dot BPI dot USD dot rate underscore float. Had that there all along. Once we get the rate, see here, when we constructed the component, we initialized the rate to 0 using, and here we create the state. This is the only place you can create the state like this. You can only do it in the constructor. You can't say this dot state equals something. You can't do that anywhere else. You can only do this in the constructor. And from this point, you have to change the state. You have to call this a set state function. And this will, in fact, overwrite the existing state with the new rate value. And now I'm going to close that function. See, I'm closing that function. This is the request handler. So when the HTTP request gets fulfilled, when we've loaded the response, then we run this code, and we end up setting the rate. Now, when setting the state on this Bitcoin component, now when you change the state of a component, then the React will re-render the component. That makes sense, right? Every component has a render method. Look, here's the render method. That's used to, write the thing into the document. When the state changes, what React does is it removes the old component, the old instance. It doesn't remove the component. It removes the HTML elements that were rendered by the component for the last state. Now that we set a new state, it takes out the old HTML code that it rendered into the document, and it renders the new HTML code into the document using this render method. And so it's basically re-rendering that, and that's where we're going to get the updated state here, or the updated rate, both state and rate. Okay, so let's see here. This is, I think I messed that up. This should be, this is component did mount. That's good. And this, something got messed up. All right, that matches with this one. And then that's inside a function call, right? That matches with that call here. And now we need to close this off. That matches with this one. And this matches way up there, which is not right. So we got that. So let's see, this is the class. We have to close the class off. This closes the component did mount function off. So the class, I'm going to close the class off here. And now I need to shut this thing down, right? Well, first, let's see, we define the class. What am I doing here? What is this doing here? What is this? This has to be inside here. Sorry, this is the event listener, right? Hold on, this is component did mount. Wait a minute, I'm screwing this all up here. So this is the, these two guys go here. Look at all the indents you got to deal with when you're doing JavaScript. It's kind of nuts. And what is this down here? I see, I got things messed up. Paste that in there. I think that's how it goes. Is that right? Something is not right. So this function. Oh, I see. It's because I'm inside this script tag. It wasn't sort of. So that matches there. So I'm good on this. And I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. There we go. Pretty sure I got that right. Yep, that's good. That's, I left this as R. Here, I got to change that. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And so here, we create this request object, this XML HTTP request object, and then we register an event listener to it, right? And then we set the, we tell it to, we set the operation. It's going to send a get message, a get request to this URL. So that's passed into the open method on this request object. It still hasn't done anything yet. Then we call send, and then it actually does it. And that's the end. See, when component did mount, this thing is going to run through here, and it sends out the request, and then it returns. Remember, this is asynchronous. So we're going to wait, which seems like forever in CPU time, until finally the load event happens. You know, when a long time later, the data comes in. And then the system says, oh, okay, we just loaded the data. Let's run the callback that we were supposed to run. And then these 3 lines are going to run. And, you know, the request object itself has a response text field where we pull out the JSON string. We pass it into the parse method of the JSON object. It's the built-in class. And that gives us that JSON string as a JavaScript object. We call that res data. And in res data, we just drill down till we get to the rate float field. I pull out the number, I call it rate. And then that's what we pass to Pug. Well, no, I'm sorry, we don't pass it to Pug. So we pass to React. We pass it to the Bitcoin instance by changing its state. I call it set state on that Bitcoin instance. And that's going to cause the render method to run. And then we're going to end up reinserting that HTML. Well, that's not actually HTML, but that does become HTML that looks very much like that. That's still JSX. I want to highlight it. All right. Got everything lined up here. Well, then we have here, once we got this, we've got this Bitcoin component defined. So let's drop it into the app. Let's go ahead and put it somewhere. So we're going to create an instance of Bitcoin, and we want to render it into the root element. Well, I'm not going to call it root anymore. I'm going to call it the Bitcoin element. Oh, we need a Bitcoin element. Where's that? Well, let's put it right here, maybe. Let's make it a div. And the ID is going to be, I know there's a faster way to do it. Instead of just saying ID equals Bitcoin, I think it's something like div sharp sign Bitcoin. Is that how it works? I can't remember now. Anyway, that's I know, I'm pretty sure this is going to work. So this will be the container that this div with that ID equaling Bitcoin, that div will become the container that our Bitcoin instance is rendered into. So it's the React.render method. So they have this render function. They call it render. Right? Render. I'm going to render into this HTML element. All right, let's see if this thing works. Error. He doesn't like that semicolon. Yep. Let's get back there. Eric was warning me about this. What is it again? It's that semicolon in return. It's right here. Yeah, he was saying that I think it's React doesn't like that. That's how that works. Just like that. That's good. There we go. 6,000. How many people bought it at 10 bucks? Well, let's see, a million there's here today. So there it is. And this is updated every minute, by the way. Let's see, 0.595. It'll eventually change. It's every minute. That's what they say anyway. But that's how that works. 5:08. We're pretty close to the end of the session here. Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and commit this. That's it. That's how a React component will initialize itself with data that it retrieves using what's referred to as ajax. And I think just with another minute I got left here, what I wanted to do is some experimentation. We won't do it now, but we don't have time. But maybe next time. Eric was mentioning that there's a library for React that's for interacting with Ajax. Do you remember the name of that? It's like Ion or something like that. It's React. Ajax and APIs. Oh, here they are. This Axios. Now, jQuery Ajax, I mean, a lot of people don't like to use jQuery because it was the go-to standard library of the past. It does a lot of stuff. I mean, it gives you buttons and all kinds of stuff, but it's, at this point in time, it's getting a little old, and a lot of developers don't like to tack it on anymore because it's big and bulky. And so this Axios is promising because according to Eric, I think he mentioned this was specifically designed to work with React. Well, promise-based HTTP client for browser. Oh, Node. It's designed to work well with Node, I suppose, somehow. For some reason, I don't know how. But, and it uses what are called promises, which I don't program with promises, but it's something you should probably look at. So maybe we'll look at this next time. But if you look at what we've done, it's no big deal. What is it? It's in the, let me go back to, is it MAP? What was it? The, oh no, it's in the pug file. I mean, look at this is not too bad, right? This is, we create the request. We add a request, an event listener to listen for the load method. Call open and send. I mean, that's not a lot. There's not a lot of stuff we need to worry about here. So we really don't need a library. I mean, that's not a lot there. So I think we'll just leave it like this for now. All right, any questions? That's it, we're finished.